Among the Irish diaspora around the world, there are few sites as charged with romance and nostalgia as this view behind me over Galway Bay. But for the people who lived by its shores in the fishing village of the Claddagh, the water here was not just a pretty backdrop, it was their place of work and a resource on which their lives depended. Galway was once a walled city, and this place behind me, the Claddagh, was outside the city walls. Within the walls, English was the dominant language, and a group of 14 prosperous Anglo-Norman families dominated urban life. Here in the Claddagh, Irish was the lingua franca, and relative to the city, the community here was poor. The people here had distinctive dress, distinctive customs, and they lived by fishing. Claddagh was the only full-time fishing community on the west coast of Ireland. Now in our day, there are no families here who make their living exclusively by fishing, but 2 centuries ago, a historian described a scene here of 500 fishing boats gathered for the start of the herring season. He might have been exaggerating slightly, but it was nevertheless a huge enterprise involving men, women and children. Now if you were here on that day 200 years ago, witnessing the huge assembly of boats, you would have seen among the fishermen some people dressed like me, Dominican friars, from the priory of St. Mary on the Hill. The fishing community and the Dominican community were intimately connected as far back as history records. And we're told that no one here would start fishing until at the start of the herring season, a Dominican friar sailed out to bless the bay with the fishing fleet gathered round him. It still happens every year here on the Sunday nearest the Feast of the Assumption. Now writers in the 19th century who described the Claddagh often used terms like primitive and wild, but it was by no means disorganised. In 1820, the historian James Hardiman wrote of the Claddagh fishermen, "They have from time immemorial been ruled by one of their own body, dignified with the title of mayor, who regulates the community according to their own peculiar laws and customs, and settles all their fishery disputes." This mayor was also sometimes called the King of the Claddagh, and his boat was marked out with white sails. The laws and customs he was expected to uphold included things like the mesh size used in nets and the dates when fishing was permitted or not permitted, not only in the immediate area here, but throughout Galway Bay. These people understood the ecology of the bay, and their practices were explicitly designed to be in harmony with it, unlike the trawlers which began working the bay in the early 19th century. At one point, 72 boats from the Claddagh engaged in battle with trawlers in the bay, cutting their nets and blocking their progress. They knew the damage being done to fish stocks by this irresponsible kind of fishing. Padge King, who was King of the Claddagh in 1891, remarked sadly on the effects of trawler fishing here. He said, "The Almighty gives great sense to all creatures for their own protection, and the herrings that used to come in millions here soon began to desert the bay and turn elsewhere for shelter." The mayor or King of the Claddagh played an important, if ultimately futile, role in protecting the rights of the fishing community. And in this, they had the full support of the Dominican friars. Elections were organised and overseen by the friars, and on one occasion, a Dominican, Father Thomas Folan, was actually elected as King of the Claddagh, and was remembered when he died in 1887 as someone who made many valiant efforts to advance the interests of the poor fishermen. One of the greatest crises for this community came, of course, during the famine in the 1840s. At that time, the Dominicans collaborated with the Quakers and fed up to 900 people a day from a soup kitchen in the priory just behind me. But they weren't just interested in immediate charity, they wanted to address the causes of poverty in the Claddagh. Father Folan wrote at the time, "If the people had been better educated, they would not have suffered all the misery that they did during the last few years." So even at the height of the famine, the Dominicans decided to found a school here in 1847. It was a project spearheaded by Father Thomas Rush, who fundraised for the school as far afield as London. The idea was simple: to encourage the local families to send their children to school, a special curriculum would be devised to include not only reading and writing, but also the practical skills of making and mending nets and sails, navigating, boat making, and so on. It was called, for this reason, the Piscatorial School, the fishing school, and food would be provided on site for the students. It ended up attracting an average of 400 students at its height, and it can still be seen behind me to this day. So the friendship between the people of the Claddagh and the Friars of St Mary on the Hill has a long history. It's a friendship forged in the face of adversity, strengthened by a shared desire for justice and progress, and a friendship that made room for prayer to God and praise of Him, who made the seas and all that is in them.